March 27, 1942, Trondheim Fjord, Norway. The moon is a dull smear through low cloud. The North Sea wind claws across the cockpit glass of a de Havilland Mosquito B Mach 4, its twin Merlin engines humming at 250 RPM. Frost rims the instrument dials. The smell of petrol and cordite mixes in the narrow space. Inside, Flight Lieutenant Ted Snaith of 105 Squadron grips the control yoke, gloved fingers trembling slightly from cold, not fear. Beside him, Navigator Flight Officer John Jock Fotheringham traces the green line of the Norwegian coast on his chart, with a pencil stub muttering course headings under the rhythmic pulse of the gyro compass. 45 seconds to target, Jock says through the intercom. Copy. Altitude 20 feet. Holding steady, Ted replies, eyes flicking between altimeter and the dark water rushing beneath. They are flying so low, the waves slap the belly of the aircraft. Behind them, another Mosquito follows Wing Commander Bennett himself, leading the first precision daylight raid deep inside Nazi-occupied territory. Their target, the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo. The RAF has wagered its reputation and the credibility of this wooden aircraft on tonight's success. Only 2 years earlier, when British de Havilland proposed building a high-speed bomber, almost entirely of Wood Air Chief Marshal Wilfred Freeman's colleagues at the Air Ministry had laughed. A furniture plane, one called it. Won't last 10 minutes against the Luftwaffe. But Freeman saw something others didn't: speed as armor. No guns, no turret, no armor plate, just sheer velocity. Now at 260 knots and dropping lower, the Mosquito is proving him right. Target ahead, Jock calls. Through the thin Perspex nose, the outline of Oslo's waterfront sharpens a cluster of black roofs and shimmering reflection. German searchlights begin to pierce the cloud, but the Mosquito is already there. Ted Banks hard left aligning for the run. Bombs gone. A jolt through the airframe. Then the load is away, 4 500-pounders hurtling downward. Seconds later, an orange flash rips across the dock front. The radio crackles to life. Eagle to Kestrel, direct hit. Direct hit, Bennett's voice tight with relief. But the Germans are awake now. Searchlights swing like white scythes across the sky. 20mm flak bursts flower in red and white. Ted shoves the throttle forward, Merlin's roaring at full boost. The Mosquito leaps ahead like a living thing, vibrating with power. Hang on, he yells as tracers stitch the night behind them. They skate along the fjord, weaving between mountain walls, so close Jock can see the snow sliding off pine branches in their wake. A pair of Bf-109s scramble from Varennes airfield, but they're too late. By the time their wheels leave the ground, the Mosquitoes are already vanishing over the sea, invisible against the gray. Back in Britain, when the photographs arrive, proof of the Oslo raid's success, skeptics go quiet. The press coins a nickname that will stick for the rest of the war, the Wooden Wonder. Yet for the men who fly her this night is only the beginning. Soon the Mosquito will become a shadow over Berlin, a phantom over Hamburg, a racing ghost no fighter can catch. And in the process, it will change the RAF forever, proving that in an age of metal and firewood can still make war. Ted levels out as they cross the North Sea, fuel needles quivering near reserve. Jock leans back and exhales for the first time in an hour. Above them, the sky is turning pale with dawn. They have flown through hell and back in a machine built from spruce and balsa. In the radio silence that follows, Ted whispers almost to himself, she's no paper plane, mate. She's bloody magic. Far below, the sea glints silver like the grain of polished wood. The Mosquito turns west, disappearing into the morning light. It began not in a factory, but in a mind that refused to accept limits. The year was 1938. Across Europe, war clouds were thickening. Germany had rearmed under Hitler, its factories hammering out Messerschmitts and Junkers bombers at an alarming rate. Britain, meanwhile, was still buried in bureaucracy committees, memos, design boards, arguing over every rivet and gun turret. British de Havilland, founder of the de Havilland Aircraft Company, sat in his Hertfordshire office one winter morning staring at a sketch. On it was a sleek twin-engine aircraft, no turrets, no armor, no heavy gunnery at all. Just speed. The design looked more like a racing plane than a bomber. It defied every RAF doctrine written since the Great War. At the time, the Air Ministry insisted that every bomber should carry defensive armament. Speed alone cannot save a crew, one report stated bluntly. The obsession with guns came from the slaughter of WWII airmen who'd flown unarmed. To the brass removing turrets seemed suicidal. But Jeffrey thought differently. If you can't hit what you can't catch, he told his engineers. He believed the key to survival lay not in armor, but in agility, a philosophy rooted in his earlier work with wooden airframes for light civilian aircraft like the DH-88 Comet Racer. Wood, he argued, was not weakness. It was freedom from the weight of steel. And there was another advantage: Britain's metal shortage. Aluminum was precious, diverted to Spitfires and Hurricanes. Yet the countryside was filled with skilled carpenters, furniture makers, and piano craftsmen who could shape spruce and birch with microscopic precision. De Havilland saw what no one else did, a hidden army of artisans waiting to build wings instead of wardrobes. His proposal reached the Air Ministry in early 1939, specification B-140, a twin-engine bomber constructed primarily of wood, capable of 400 mph, carrying a 1,000-pound bomb load, and unarmed to save weight. The reaction was ice cold. One Air Vice Marshal sneered, "We shall not fight the Luftwaffe with mahogany wardrobes." Others dismissed it as impractical fantasy. Only Air Chief Marshal Wilfred Freeman, then Vice Chief of the Air Staff, recognized its potential. Freeman championed the design fighting through endless meetings to keep it alive, even as war erupted in September 1939. By the spring of 1940, Britain was burning. The Luftwaffe had swept across Western Europe, and the Battle of Britain loomed. Freeman's superiors wanted heavy bombers like the Wellington and Halifax, not toy planes. Still, he pressed on. "Let him build one prototype," Freeman ordered. "If it fails, we'll bury it quietly. But if it works..." The prototype W250 took shape in a quiet hangar at Hatfield. The air smelled of sawdust glue and hot coffee. Technicians sanded balsa sheets thinner than a fingernail, layering them with Canadian birch to create a revolutionary sandwich construction light as air strong as steel. Every joint was glued, not riveted, using a new adhesive called casein formaldehyde, which bonded wood tighter than bolts ever could. The design was graceful, a slender fuselage tapering into twin Merlins, a single fin tail, smooth lines that spoke of speed. The crew of two sat side by side beneath a glazed canopy, no gunner, no armor, just trust in velocity. By November 1940, as the Blitz hammered London, the prototype rolled out into the frosty dawn at Hatfield Aerodrome. Ground crews murmured that it looked too delicate to fly. The local paper joked it was a piano with wings. Jeffrey de Havilland Jr., the founder's son and chief test pilot, climbed into the cockpit that morning. He wore no parachute. "If it breaks," he told his crew, "I'd rather go down with her." At 3:45 p.m., the twin Merlins coughed to life. Their roar echoed across the airfield. The Mosquito leapt forward, wheels leaving the ground in less than 400 yards. Watching from below, engineers gasped it soared effortlessly, banking smooth as silk, climbing faster than any bomber on record. The stopwatch confirmed the impossible 382 miles per hour level flight, faster than a Spitfire Mach I. When Jeffrey Jr. landed, he pulled off his goggles and smiled. "Gentlemen," he said, "that'll do." Word spread quickly through the RAF. The paper plane had flown, and it was faster than the fighters meant to protect it. Freeman ordered production immediately, but skeptics still circled. The war was shifting fast. Priorities changed daily. Factories were bombed. Resources were tight. Then, in the dark days of 1941, the RAF found itself desperate for a machine that could strike quickly, photograph enemy positions, and escape untouched. The Mosquito, with its blistering speed and 500-mile range, fit the bill perfectly. The first squadrons received their aircraft in early 1942. Crews were wary at first. No guns, no armor, and built of plywood. It sounded suicidal. Yet the moment pilots pushed the throttles open and felt those twin Merlins surge, doubts began to melt away. "Feels like flying a bloody thoroughbred," one test pilot remarked. And so the legend began, from furniture factories to frontline squadrons, from sawdust to sky. A plane born of desperation, belief, and the refusal to obey convention. The Mosquito was airborne, and the world was about to discover that the most dangerous weapon of all wasn't always made of metal. September 20th, 1941, a gray dawn over the English coast. a line of 6 Mosquito WWII reconnaissance aircraft from One photographic reconnaissance unit taxied out of RAF Benson. Their wooden fuselages gleamed faintly under the weak sun streaked with dew. On the runway ground, crewmen in heavy coats gave quick thumbs up, stepping back as the twin Merlins roared alive. Inside the cockpit of Flight Lieutenant Maurice "Shorty" Longbottom, the smell of oil and canvas mingled with the high whine of boost pressure. His navigator, Sergeant R.P. Pip Dalton, checked their cameras, 2 F-24 units loaded with 8-inch film lenses polished to perfection. Their mission: photograph enemy shipping and installations along the French Atlantic coast from Cherbourg to Brest. "Ready?" Longbottom asked, gripping the yoke. "Let's show them what furniture can do," Dalton grinned. The Mosquito rolled and lifted, smooth, quick, light. Within minutes, they were climbing over the channel, leaving white contrails curling like silk threads. The aircraft leveled at 28,000 feet, cruising at 360 mph, faster than anything the Luftwaffe could yet send against them. Below, the gray Atlantic rippled with the wakes of German E-boats. Longbottom dipped the nose, slightly calibrating speed for the first pass. Dalton leaned into the camera control panel, the shutters clicking in mechanical rhythm. The light flickered silver over the lens. By the time a pair of Bf-109F scrambled from Brittany, the Mosquito was already gone, vanished into cloud. The German pilots never saw it again. When the film was developed that afternoon, the images were razor-sharp, every gun emplacement and supply ship perfectly visible. Intelligence officers at Benson stared in disbelief. The wooden spy plane had returned untouched. Within weeks, Mosquito reconnaissance flights were mapping U-boat pens, V-weapon sites, and rail depots all across occupied Europe. Luftwaffe reports began to note high-speed intruders that appeared and disappeared before interception. But the real test came 3 months later, when the RAF authorized the first offensive mission. January 31, 1942. The daylight raid on Abbeville Airfield, 105 Squadron, RAF Swanton Morley. 6 Mosquito B-Make-4 bombers warmed up on the flight line. Their targets, Luftwaffe hangars and repair shops supporting German fighter operations over the Channel. Gentleman Wing Commander John D. Gibson briefed his men, tapping a map pinned to the operations board. "We go in fast and low. No escorts. If flak opens up, ignore it. If fighters appear, outrun them. We are not here to duel. We are here to humiliate them." The crews chuckled, though nerves ran high. None had flown an unarmed daylight bombing run before. At 1100 hours, the first pair lifted off engines, screaming in unison. Crossing the French coast at treetop height, the Mosquitoes darted inland at 350 knots. Fields, farmhouses, and hedgerows flashed by like streaks of color beneath the thin layer of cloud. Flak erupted near the target zone, but the bombers were already past it. Gibson's voice crackled over the radio, "Bombs gone." Seconds later, columns of smoke rose from Abbeville's hangars. German ground crews scattered as the shockwaves tore through sheet metal roofs. A Bf-109 pair tried to intercept from altitude, but couldn't close the distance. Their maximum speed was 382 mph, the Mosquito's 400. By the time the fighters dove to attack, the British aircraft were specks over the horizon. Back in England, de Havilland's engineers gathered around the debrief table as Gibson walked in, grinning, like a man who had just defied death. "Unarmed, unarmored, untouched," he said simply. "Fastest bomber in the world." The success electrified the RAF. For the first time since 1940, Britain had a bomber that could strike by day and return unscathed. The idea of speed as defense, mocked for years, was suddenly doctrine. The wooden ghost. By the summer of 1942, Mosquito squadrons were flying deep into enemy airspace with surgical precision. The aircraft was evolving fast new variants for bombing, night fighting, pathfinding, and even maritime strikes. Each shared the same DNA: light, fast, and lethal. At RAF Whiten, 105 Squadron and 139 Squadron began a new kind of war: pinpoint daylight attacks. No longer mass raids of hundreds of bombers blotting the sky, just 2 or 4 Mosquitoes streaking across Europe to hit a single target with uncanny accuracy. On September 25th, they struck Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, a raid so daring it stunned even Bomber Command. And it worked. The press splashed the headline "Wooden Wonder Outruns Luftwaffe." Inside the Reich, Hermann Goering fumed. "I turn green and yellow with envy," he told subordinates. "The Mosquito can reach Berlin when our fighters cannot catch it. The British, they make aircraft from wood. Our factories are bombed to rubble." He was right to be angry. The Mosquito's blend of speed and range was rewriting the balance of air power. Where the lumbering Sterlings and Halifaxes needed entire squadrons, and fighter cover 2 Mosquitoes could slip through radar gaps, bomb a Gestapo office, and be home for tea. In war rooms from Berlin to London, analysts began calling it the ghost plane. Radar operators cursed its blips that came and went before flak could even align. Pilots spoke of its flight characteristics with reverent, smooth roll, fingertip handling, perfect trim at 350 knots. Wood, once mocked as primitive, had become a material of stealth. It absorbed radar-muted vibration and resisted small arms fire surprisingly well. Even flak shells sometimes passed clean through the laminated skin without detonating. For the men who flew her, the Mosquito wasn't just an aircraft, it was a living thing. She felt alive, one navigator wrote. At full throttle, you could sense her breathing through the controls. That intimacy between man and machine was what made the Mosquito truly dangerous. It wasn't brute force. It was grace. But as 1943 dawned, the RAF began to see a new horizon for the Wooden Wonder, one that would take it beyond reconnaissance and harassment raids. The Mosquito would soon go head-to-head with Germany's best defenses, striking at the very heart of the Reich itself. January 30th, 1943, Berlin Reich Chancellery. A gray drizzle hangs over the capital as Adolf Hitler steps to the podium for the 10th anniversary of his rise to power. Flags ripple across Wilhelmstrasse. The air hums with parades, brass bands, and the sound of marching boots. But high above the pageantry, at 28,000 feet, 2 tiny silver specks are slicing eastward through cloud. They are Mosquito BMKI-4s of No. 105 Squadron led by Wing Commander D.E.G.B. Bennett, tasked with a raid so audacious it borders on insanity to bomb Berlin in daylight at the precise hour of Hitler's speech. "Steady, lads," Bennett's voice crackles over the intercom. "We're on the clock. Each aircraft carries 4 500-pound bombs. No escort. No guns. Just the faith that speed is armor." The mission had been conceived by Air Marshal Sir Charles Portal himself. It wasn't about destruction, it was about humiliation. The Mosquito would arrive over Berlin exactly when the Führer's speech was to be broadcast live to the nation. A timed strike to disrupt his words, to make him flinch in front of millions. At 11:00 a.m., as German radio announcers introduced the ceremony, radar stations along the Dutch coast picked up faint echoes approaching from the west, too fast, too small to be heavy bombers. "Probably reconnaissance," one operator said, dismissing it. By the time alarm sirens began to wail over Berlin, the Mosquitoes were already overhead. "Target in sight," Bennett shouted. Below, the city stretched in gray winter haze. The Chancellery complex glimmered faintly through thin cloud. He toggled the bomb switch. 4 explosions cracked through the heart of Berlin. The broadcast faltered, static, crackling across radios across the Reich. Hitler paused, frozen mid-sentence. For a few seconds, the mighty Führer was silenced by a pair of British aircraft made of wood. When the sound resumed, the announcer's voice was trembling. "Air raid alarm. The Führer will continue his speech from a secure location." As Bennett turned west, anti-aircraft batteries opened up black puffs of flak, chasing the retreating ghosts. German fighters scrambled from nearby bases, but by the time they reached altitude, the Mosquitoes were gone. Average escape speed 392 miles per hour. The propaganda ministry tried to hide the embarrassment, but the BBC broadcast it that very evening, Berlin bombed by British Mosquitoes during Hitler's address. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Goering, incandescent with rage, shouted at his staff, "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito." The British knocked together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory can build, and they give it a speed which makes us look ridiculous. 139 Squadron launched a second strike, this time on the Reich's Air Ministry itself. It was a deliberate taunt. The timing was chosen to coincide with Reichsmarschall Göring's own anniversary broadcast. At 2:00 p.m., 3 more mosquitoes screamed over Berlin. Their bombs fell with surgical precision, tearing holes in the very building from which Goering was speaking. Once again, the broadcast cut out in chaos. Back in London, the air staff was elated. "The best show of the war," one officer wrote. 2 squadrons, 6 aircraft, and the entire German leadership humiliated before their people. From that day forward, the Luftwaffe's respect for the Mosquito turned into obsession. Radar operators tracked phantom echoes that vanished into cloud. Fighter units along the Channel coast were ordered to keep altitude patrols ready for Mosquito intruders, but they could rarely catch them. The aircraft's unarmed design was its greatest advantage. Lighter than any bomber, it could cruise above 370 mph per climb like a fighter and dive to treetop height in seconds. Pilots often joked that the only armor plate we've got is our nerve. And yet, in the heart of the Reich, German engineers were racing to build something that could end this humiliation. The Messerschmitt Mi-262 jet was already on the drawing board, promising speeds over 500 mph. Goering pinned his hopes on it. "Once our jets fly," he said, "the Mosquito will be finished." But that day was still far away. The expanding war. Mosquito versatility emerges. While Berlin reeled from the psychological blow, the RAF began deploying the Mosquito in new roles. Night fighter versions equipped with AI, Mach 4 radar hunted Luftwaffe bombers over British skies. The NF Mach 2 variant, armed with 4 20mm Hispano cannons and 4 303 Brownings, quickly became the most feared interceptor in Europe. At RAF Kolteschall, pilots of Num. 157 Squadron took to the air night after night, guided by radar controllers in darkened operations rooms. The enemy they hunted were Heinkel He-111s and Junkers 88s of KG-6 and KG-54, still trying to hit British cities in 1943. Flying Officer Richard Dickey Rawnsley, one of the early Mosquito night fighter navigators, recalled the eerie silence of those hunts, nothing but the hum of the Merlin engines and the glow of the radar scope. Then a blip, faint at first, growing stronger. We'd close in until the exhaust flames of the Jerry bomber filled the windscreen. A squeeze of the trigger, a burst of 20mm, and the sky turned orange. Within months, Mosquito night fighter crews claimed hundreds of kills. The Luftwaffe's nocturnal raids dwindled. But while Britain defended her skies, a new doctrine was forming: precision strike. Instead of mass carpet bombing, the RAF wanted to hit critical targets with surgical accuracy. Bridges, rail yards, Gestapo prisons, headquarters, all vulnerable to fast, low-level attacks. And no aircraft was better suited to that than the Mosquito. The next phase of its career would take it into some of the most daring operations of the entire war, raids that would redefine the meaning of precision and courage. Some would call them suicide missions. Others would call them miracles of skill. Either way, they would make history. February 18, 1944, Amiens, northern France. The sky is pale and brittle, the ground glazed with frost. 12 Mosquitoes from Nantes. 487 Squadron RNZAF and No. 464 Squadron RAAF crouch along the perimeter track at RAF Hunsdon, their propellers idling in thick vapor. Ground crews tug at scarf collars and slap their gloves, watching the crews climb aboard. Each aircraft carries 4 500-pounders with delayed fuses. Their target is the Amiens prison, where 120 French resistance fighters await execution. The operation has been rehearsed for weeks under a veil of secrecy. Officially, it's called Operation Jericho. Unofficially, among the pilots, it's the impossible job. At precisely 11:00 a.m., Group Captain Charles Piccard, his white bulldog mascot painted beneath his cockpit, leads the first formation into the frigid sky. His navigator, Flight Lieutenant Alan Broadley, double-checks the course plotted along the Somme River Valley. They'll cross the French coast at hedge-top height, 50 feet, maybe less, at over 300 miles per hour. Radio silence is absolute. Engines thunder like restrained fury as the formation sweeps south over the Channel, waves flashing silver beneath them. Every pilot knows that one mistake, one twitch of the stick, and the Mosquito's laminated wings will shear under the pressure. Inside the lead aircraft, Broadley calls out headings. Left 2 degrees. Watch the trees. Bridge ahead. Pickard nods, eyes fixed ahead. His altimeter barely flickers above zero. Farmhouses blur past. Cattle scatter in panic as the formation tears across open fields. Target 1 minute, Broadly says. Then suddenly, there it is. The high stone walls of Amiens prison, surrounded by snow-covered fields. A German guard tower looms at one corner. Pickard banks hard left, lining up for the first run. Stand by. Bombs gone. 4 black shapes drop from the bomb bay, skip across the ground, and detonate against the outer wall. A plume of dust and debris erupts into the air. A second wave, led by squadron leader Ian McRitchie, follows immediately, their bombs tearing open the north wall and barracks. Prisoners' tiny figures below can be seen rushing into the courtyards, hands waving. German flak guns finally react, spewing tracer into the air. One Mosquito takes a hit, spirals down, trailing smoke crashes in a burst of flame near the railway. But the formation presses on. Pickard circles once more, assessing damage, ignoring shrapnel pinging against the fuselage. "Looks good, they're out," Broadly yells. Pickard hesitates only a moment, then turns west. All aircraft home. Moments later, flak finds them. A burst rips through the fuselage. Smoke fills the cockpit. Witnesses later report seeing Pickard's Mosquito pitch up sharply, one wing tearing off before the aircraft disintegrates. The man who led one of the most daring precision raids of the war vanishes into the French countryside. Of the 120 prisoners marked for death, 74 escape. Many rejoin the resistance. Back in Britain, news of the raid spreads quietly, then explosively. The Mosquito's legend grows again, not just as a machine of war, but as a scalpel of mercy. The anatomy of precision, what made such raids possible, was not luck, but design. The Mosquito's plywood sandwich structure absorbed vibration and could endure low-altitude turbulence without metal fatigue. Its Merlin. 21 or 25 engines gave it both range and acceleration, while the Norden-style bomb sight, adapted for British optics, allowed pinpoint accuracy at treetop height. De Havilland engineers refined every line for minimal drag. Even the rivets on metal panels were countersunk and sealed with dope. The result was an aircraft that could skim the ground at over 310 mph without shaking apart. Pilots described the sensation as riding a razor. The horizon became a blur, trees turned into flashes of green and brown, and every turn demanded absolute trust between pilot and navigator. The RAF soon realized they had created the perfect platform for surgical strikes, fast, precise, and terrifying to the enemy. Copenhagen. Operation Carthage. February 21, 1945. A year after Amiens, the Mosquito was called upon again, this time to strike Shellhus, the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, Denmark. Dozens of Danish resistance members were imprisoned inside. Execution was imminent. At dawn, 20 Mosquitoes from Nome, 464, 487, and 21 squadrons assembled over the North Sea. The crews knew the risks. The target lay deep within the city, surrounded by civilians. The operation demanded absolute precision, hit the lower floors to collapse the building, but spare the prison cells on the top floors. Wing Commander Peter Klebo led the first wave. He skimmed across rooftops, down city boulevards lined with trams. Copenhageners looked up in astonishment as the aircraft thundered by at window height. "Steady! Steady!" his navigator called. Then, just seconds from release, Klebo's Mosquito clipped a lamppost and crashed into a school building, killing dozens of children and staff. Flames erupted, black smoke engulfing the target zone. The following waves, blinded by the smoke, pressed on regardless. Their bombs struck true. Shellhus crumbled, killing many Gestapo officers and destroying records of hundreds of resistance members. Over 90 prisoners escaped execution, though at a terrible cost. In London, debate raged over whether the raid was worth it. But for the survivors in Copenhagen, it was liberation. They called the Mosquito crews the angels in wooden wings, blowing bridges at precise coordinates for advancing Allied armies, hitting communication hubs hours before D-Day. It became a symbol of British ingenuity and moral resolve, a weapon that could strike hard yet with conscience. But for all its precision and grace, there was another side to the story, the relentless attrition of men and machines who flew those missions. For every daring success, there was a price. The next chapter of the Mosquito's journey would take it deeper into danger, from the burning skies of Berlin to the frozen fjords of Norway and into the dark heart of total war. Autumn 1943, RAF Colerne, Wiltshire. The rain lashes sideways across the airfield as two figures sprint through puddles toward a waiting Mosquito NF Mosquito 13. The black-painted fuselage gleams like wet coal under the sodium lamps. Its nose houses a revolutionary secret, a black box labeled AI Mach V8, Britain's most advanced airborne interception radar. Pilot Flight Lieutenant John Cunningham, already a legend, with 604 squadron, swings up into the cockpit. His navigator Flight Officer Jimmy Rawnsley settles beside him, flipping switches on the scope as the cockpit glows pale green. Ground control to Cat's Eyes, 1 bandit heading 085 Angels 20, the radio crackles. Cunningham's calm voice replies, Roger, control. Turning to intercept, the Merlin 21's roar alive, propellers slicing mist. The Mosquito lifts into the blackness like a phantom. Outside visibility is 0. Inside, the radar scope pulses with a single trace. There he is, Rawnsley says quietly. Range 3 miles. Bearing port 10. Got him, Cunningham murmurs. Going in. They close silently through cloud, guided by invisible waves of radar. At 1,000 yards, the faint orange glow of German exhaust flames blooms ahead. A Junkers 88 bomber of Kampfgeschwader 6, homeward bound from a raid on Bristol. Cunningham throttles back, holding position just below and behind the target. Steady. Range 400, 300, Rawnsley whispers. Cunningham squeezes the trigger. 8 streams of tracer leap from the Mosquito's nose, 4 20mm Hispano cannon, and 4 303 Brownings, raking the Ju-88 from tail to nose. It erupts in fire spirals downward and vanishes into the black. Splash 1, Rawnsley confirms. Cunningham says nothing, just banks west toward home. Another night, another kill. By dawn, another chalk mark joins the growing tally on the squadron board. The Mosquito Night Fighter Command is rewriting the rules of nocturnal warfare. The end of the Blitz, the rise of the Mosquito Fence. Before 1943, Britain's cities were nightly targets for Luftwaffe bombers. Radar stations tracked them, searchlights probed, and anti-aircraft guns blazed skyward, yet German crews still reached their targets. But the arrival of the Mosquito night fighters changed that. By pairing radar-equipped aircraft with ground controllers, using the GCI ground-controlled interception network, the RAF built an invisible barrier across southern England. When enemy bombers crossed the channel, operators at tracking stations vectored Mosquitoes directly into intercept positions. Unlike the heavy bow fighters that preceded them, Mosquitoes could climb rapidly, engage, and pursue at will. Their radar allowed them to track targets even through cloud. In 1943 alone, Mosquito squadrons claimed over 600 enemy aircraft, many without ever being seen. German bomber crews began calling them Schwarze-Witwen Black Widows. The psychological effect was devastating. The Luftwaffe's baby Blitz offensive in early 1944 crumbled under relentless Mosquito interception. Crews who once bombed London with impunity now faced invisible hunters that struck without warning. One German survivor later recalled, "You saw nothing. Only the flash of guns from nowhere, then fire." Every man in the crew feared the Mosquito more than the flak. No longer content to defend, the RAF sent them offensively over occupied Europe as intruders prowling German airfields at night, ambushing bombers as they took off or landed. From bases like RAF Ford and RAF Little, snoring crews of Num 23 and 141 squadrons took off after dark, crossing the North Sea at wave-top height. They slipped past radar using cloud cover and moonlight, arriving just as Luftwaffe bombers returned from missions. At St. Trond Venlo and Gilze Regen, German ground crews would look up to see tracers tearing through their runways. Hangars exploded, parked aircraft burned, and searchlights swung uselessly. Squadron leader Reg Grant, a New Zealander with 141 Squadron, described the sensation in his logbook. You'd see them landing, nav lights blinking. You'd wait until the wheels touched, then fire. Quick, brutal, and gone before their flak woke up. The intruder Mosquitoes carried flash bombs to mark targets and sometimes dropped propaganda leaflets to taunt the enemy. Every sortie disrupted Luftwaffe morale and exhausted their already strained defenses. By 1945, intruder missions accounted for thousands of destroyed or damaged German aircraft without a single major RAF raid. Technology meets tactics. The Mosquito's superiority wasn't just speed, it was integration. By combining radar radio navigation and precision flying, the RAF created a system far ahead of its time. WWII. Radar could detect a target 6 miles away and guide the pilot to within 200 yards. IFF identification, friend or foe, prevented friendly fire during complex night operations. Rebecca-Eureka beacon pairs allowed Mosquito pathfinders to locate invasion forces with uncanny accuracy. These technologies reached their apex on June 6, 1944 D-Day. While heavy bombers pounded the French coast, Mosquito pathfinders marked bridges, roads, and radar sites ahead of the landings. Night fighter squadrons patrolled the beaches, intercepting German bombers before they could threaten the invasion fleet. Cunningham and his fellow night fighter veterans were there, orbiting silently above the channel, waiting for targets that never came. The Luftwaffe's night offensive had been broken long before the first soldiers stepped ashore. The Hunters become legends. By war's end, Mosquito night fighter crews held some of the highest individual kill counts in the RAF. Cunningham alone tallied 20 victories all at night, earning the nickname Cat's Eyes. But beyond numbers, the night squadrons represented something deeper, a turning point in aerial warfare. They had proven that technology coordination and finesse could outweigh brute force. The Mosquito's wooden frame, once derided as fragile, now symbolized resilience and innovation. Its radar dish and guns worked in harmony, science and skill fused into a single deadly entity. And for the men who flew her, the bond ran personal. Many spoke of hearing the faint creak of her wooden ribs in flight, as if the aircraft itself were alive, a loyal companion, whispering through the storm. The wooden wonder had become a hunter of the night, and the Luftwaffe's terror. But the story wasn't over. The Mosquito was about to enter its most dangerous arena, yet striking deep into the heart of Germany's industrial empire, where even speed could not always guarantee survival. March 1st, 1943, 21,000 feet above the Ruhr Valley. The sky is glowing red beneath the clouds, the reflection of burning steelworks and munitions plants. The bomber stream of RAF Bomber Command stretches for miles. Lancasters, Halifaxes, Stirlings, heavy lumbering shadows dragging their payloads through flak storms. But far ahead of them, invisible and alone, fly the Pathfinder's Mosquito crews of Num. 8 group marking the targets. Marker 1 to main force comes the calm voice of Wing Commander Don Bennett over the wireless. Target indicators away. Stand by for red over green. Below, a single Mosquito dives through flak bursts, the navigator releasing magnesium flares that burst into radiant blossoms over the Ruhr's industrial core. Anti-aircraft guns open up instantly, the night turning into a web of tracer and searchlight beams. The pilot hauls back on the control column, pulling into a steep climb, instruments shaking from near-sonic vibration. Yet he holds steady because every second counts. Behind him, the main bomber force is navigating by those very flares. Missed by a mile and 600 bombers could miss the city entirely. This was the world of the Mosquito Pathfinders, where speed met precision, and courage meant flying straight into the teeth of Germany's defenses without ever dropping a bomb in anger. The science of illumination, Bomber Command's early raids had been disastrous. In 1941, only 1 in 4 aircraft hit within 5 miles of their target. But when the Mosquito joined No. 8 group under Bennett's command, accuracy improved overnight. Equipped with oboe and H-2S radar, the Mosquito could locate targets in cloud or darkness with mathematical precision. Oboe used radio triangulation between 2 ground stations in Britain to measure the aircraft's distance and bearing. H-2S projected radar reflections onto a screen showing rivers, cities, and coastlines as glowing outlines. A skilled navigator could place a marker flare within 100 yards of the intended aim point, an accuracy unheard of in 1943. The Mosquito's job was to illuminate, not obliterate, but that task was often the most dangerous of all. Pathfinders flew first, drawing every gun in the Ruhr. At Essen-Duisburg and Hamburg, German radar-guided searchlights created blinding corridors of light, the Kammhuber line. Crews called it the cage. Once caught, bombers had only seconds before flak tore them apart. But the Mosquito could break the rules. Its low radar cross-section made it nearly invisible. Operators often mistook it for a single fighter, not a bomber. When one did get caught, pilots used its speed and agility to twist out of the beams, plunging into cloud or diving to treetop level at 400 mph maneuvers no Lancaster could ever attempt. Wing Commander Edward Ted Sizemore, one of the RAF's most skilled navigators, once said, "When you were in a Mosquito, you felt untouchable, but you also knew that one mistake at that speed would be your last." Missions to Berlin, Leipzig, and Kiel tested every limit of man and machine. On one winter night, Mosquitoes from Num. 139 squadron streaked across the North Sea in freezing fog, their de-icing systems barely coping, navigation instruments icing over. Yet they arrived over Berlin ahead of the main force within seconds of schedule. Their flares turned the sky blood red over the Tiergarten and the Siemensstadt industrial area. Minutes later, over 600 heavy bombers followed the trail. Berlin burned for 2 days. Hitler's personal adjutant, Martin Bormann, wrote in his diary that the Führer was incandescent with rage, railing that these tiny English planes could invade our capital at will. Goering's reply was bitter. "We have built an empire of steel and they beat us with plywood." The Mosquito had become a symbol of defiance, a silent messenger that could reach the heart of the Reich and leave without permission. The dangers of perfection, but such perfection demanded a price. Pathfinder crews faced a mortality rate nearly equal to frontline bomber squadrons. Many never returned, disappearing into cloud banks, over Europe engines frozen or struck by unseen flak. Navigator Flying Officer Arthur Banks wrote in his final letter home, "They call us the eyes of the bomber stream, but sometimes I think we are the first to look death in the face." Losses mounted in 1943 to 44. The Mosquito's speed saved many, but not all. Even the best woodcraft couldn't resist a lucky shell burst. At Dusseldorf, one Mosquito took a direct hit in the wing root. The entire wing tore free, yet the pilot somehow held it level long enough for his navigator to bail out. He went down with the aircraft. Still, new volunteers arrived every week. Crews competed fiercely for Pathfinder slots drawn by the reputation of precision and pride. To fly a Mosquito was to belong to an elite men who measured courage not by tonnage dropped, but by the seconds they spent over the target. Light in the darkness. By 1944, as Allied armies advanced into France, Mosquitoes continued their nightly rhythm, streaking ahead of the heavy bombers, painting targets with colored fires. In the glow of their flares, whole cities lit up like stars, tragic and terrible. To the men below, those fleeting lights in the clouds meant death was coming. To the air crews above, it meant hope that the war might finally turn. One pilot described it poetically: "You'd drop your markers and pull away, watching the sky blossom below you. And for a moment, it was beautiful until you remembered what it meant." The Mosquito had become both painter and predator, marking death in colors of red, green, and white. But even as it mastered the night war, a new challenge was rising: daylight interception. The Germans had begun deploying jet fighters, and the Mosquito, for all its speed, would soon face something even faster. The wooden wonder's reign as the fastest aircraft in the sky was about to be tested, and the outcome would define the twilight of the air war over Europe. July 1944, northern Germany above the Weser River. Dawn streaks the horizon in dull crimson. The engines of a Mosquito PR Mach 60 hum evenly at 27,000 feet, the altimeter needle steady. Inside the narrow cockpit, Flight Lieutenant Tony Wickham squints through the frost-flecked glass, scanning the pale blue distance. His navigator, Sergeant Colin Hargreaves, adjusts the oxygen feed and leans over the camera controls. They're on a long-range photographic reconnaissance sortie from RAF Benson, codenamed Blueberry Run, tasked with photographing new airfield construction sites near Bremen. For months, intelligence analysts have seen reports of a new German jet fighter. Some think it's propaganda. Others are less certain. "Coming up on point," Charlie Hargreaves says quietly. Visibility's good. Hold this heading. Copy. Let's make it quick. The Mosquito dives slightly to 24,000 feet, engines whistling, cameras whirring in rhythmic bursts. Below, the blurred lines of hangars and concrete runways slip past. Then Hargreaves freezes, leaning toward the glass. Tony. Contact. 2 o'clock. High closing fast. A flash of silver darts across the sky, sleek, swept, unreal. A Messerschmitt, Me-262, Schwalbe, the world's first operational jet fighter, arcs in behind them. "Bloody hell, that's him!" Wickham shouts, shoving the throttles forward. The Merlins scream, the Mosquito surges. The jet is faster, easily 100 miles an hour faster. But its pilot overshoots in his dive, the sheer momentum carrying him ahead. Wickham rolls hard right, diving toward the cloud layer. "Keep her level," Hargreaves yells. Tracers hiss past white lines against the sky. The Mosquito's frame rattles but holds. Wickham plunges into cloud instruments spinning. They emerge barely 500 feet above the treetops, racing west at 360 knots. The Me-262 doesn't follow. Its jets flame out briefly in the dive, its pilot unwilling to risk a stall so low. For 10 long minutes, Wickham keeps the throttle open until the sea appears on the horizon. Only then does he ease back, heart pounding. "Speed still works," he mutters, and Luck, Hargreaves replies, exhaling. That encounter, one of the first between a Mosquito and a jet, proved two things: the jet age had arrived, and the Mosquito was still just fast enough to survive it. The race against extinction. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was collapsing, but its new technology was lethal. The Me-262 and the rocket-powered Me-163 Comet were intercepting Allied bombers with terrifying speed. Yet their engines were fragile, their endurance short, and their pilots few. Against these new threats, Mosquito units adapted quickly. Reconnaissance squadrons flew even higher, often above 33,000 feet, where the jets struggled to climb. Night fighter variants used radar to ambush jets during takeoff or landing when their fuel loads and speeds were limited. One such engagement occurred in October 1944. A Mosquito NF MK-XX of No. 409 Squadron RCAF, piloted by Flight Lieutenant R.S. Audet, intercepted a Me-262 near Dusseldorf at night. Using onboard radar and the glow of the jet's exhaust as a guide, Audet closed to 600 yards and opened fire. The Me-262 exploded mid-air, one of the few jet kills by a piston-engined aircraft. The Mosquito remained adaptable, part spy, part assassin, part survivor. Berlin, again. The final raids. Even as Germany's defenses crumbled, the RAF continued to send Mosquitoes over Berlin, not with bombs, but with psychological precision. Late in the war, these missions were less about destruction than about humiliation. Timed daylight strikes that mocked the Reich's once vaunted defenses. On April 20, 1945, Hitler's 56th birthday, Mosquitoes of No. 139 Squadron crossed the Baltic under heavy cloud and reached Berlin at noon. Their bombs fell within a mile of the Reich Chancellery. German anti-aircraft gunners, exhausted and half-starved, fired aimlessly into the mist. The raid lasted minutes. For the crews, it felt almost symbolic. The same aircraft that had silenced Hitler's voice 2 years before was now marking the twilight of his empire. "Imagine that," one pilot said later. "A war that began with plywood, ending with plywood over Berlin." PR units photographed every mile of road, bridge, and port to assess post-war reconstruction. Fighter bombers of Banff Strike Wing hunted German shipping in Norwegian fjords, skimming at mast height to unleash rockets and 57mm Mollins cannon fire. Bomber variants flew nuisance raids, harassing enemy logistics at night, denying rest to cities already broken. In one of the war's final operations, April 25, 1945, Mosquitoes of No. 608 Squadron bombed the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, again a poetic bookend to the mission that had defined their precision legacy a year earlier. When the guns finally fell silent, more than 7,700 Mosquitoes had been built, an astonishing number considering they were crafted in carpentry shops across Britain and Canada. Factories in Hatfield, Leavesden, and Toronto worked day and night, their workforces a mix of pilots, widows, carpenters, and teenage apprentices. Each wing, each spar, each propeller blade was hand-shaped, bonded, and sanded smooth. From their efforts came a machine of paradoxes, fragile yet fierce, old-fashioned, yet futuristic. The Luftwaffe's final word. In May 1945, after Germany's surrender, RAF officers visited the wrecked airfields of the Reich. Among the captured documents was a technical report from the Luftwaffe's Air Ministry titled Gegen den Mosquito, against the mosquito. It listed dozens of countermeasures, faster fighters, radar traps, heavier flak concentrations. None had worked. The final line read simply, "Adequate defense against this aircraft exists." Even in defeat, the Germans acknowledged the wooden wonder had outflown an empire of steel, from plywood to legend. In less than 5 years, the Mosquito had evolved from a rejected prototype into one of the most versatile aircraft in history. It had served as bomber, fighter, pathfinder, and reconnaissance platform, torpedo carrier, radar hunter, and photo scout, the RAF's fastest, lightest, and most cost-efficient design of the war. For its crews, it was more than a weapon. It was a companion. Many said that no other aircraft spoke to its pilot like the Mosquito did. It demanded respect but gave life in return. The jet age was coming, yes, but for a few more precious months, in 1945, the fastest thing in the sky was still made of wood glue and courage. And as those last mosquitoes crossed the North Sea toward home streaked with soot and salt, the men aboard could feel it in their bones, the hum of the merlins, the creak of the wooden ribs, the whisper of the wind through spruce wings. A plane that began as a joke had ended as a legend. January 1945, Banff, northeast Scotland. The North Sea wind cuts like a knife through the dispersal area of RAF Banff Strike Wing. Ground crews crouch beneath the wings of 30 Mosquito FB Mach-6 fighter bombers, tightening fuel caps and wiping frost from the gun ports. The air smells of salt fuel and cold iron. Inside the ready room, the crews huddle around a blackboard scrawled with their mission order: target German shipping convoy, Karmsund Fjord, Norway. Objective: destroy enemy cargo vessels supplying U-boats operating from Bergen and Trondheim. The man giving the briefing is Group Captain Max Aitken, son of Lord Beaverbrook, newspaper magnate turned warrior. His voice is clipped, confident. The fjords are narrow and the flak's thick, but remember, lads, the Norwegians are watching. Make them proud. He taps a pointer on the map. We go in low, 2 wings abreast. Rockets first, guns next. Keep your speed up and never ever turn inside the fjord. You'll never make it out. Outside engines cough to life, shattering the quiet morning. The mosquitoes roll down the icy tarmac in pairs, propellers carving vapor trails into the mist. The sea lies 20 miles east, gray, rippling, merciless. At 0800 hours, Aitken's voice comes over the intercom: Banff wing form up. Let's show them what furniture can do. White spray streaks the wooden fuselages. Each aircraft carries 8 60-pound rockets beneath its wings and 500 rounds for its 4 Hispano cannons. Navigator Flying Officer Doug Mould checks his stopwatch. 5 minutes to target. Convoy should be in the fjord mouth. Pilot Flight Lieutenant Jack Stevenson adjusts trim. If they're not, we'll find them. They skim across the water so low, the prop wash ripples the surface. Snow-dusted cliffs rise ahead, and beyond them, a narrow corridor of dark water snakes inland Karmsund Fjord. Then there they are, Mould shouts. A line of merchantmen, gray hulls camouflaged against the rocks, escorted by flagships. Stevenson noses down. Let's dance. The Mosquito roars into the fjord rockets, streaking away in pairs, trails of smoke slicing through the cold air. Explosions hammer the shoreline. A cargo ship bursts into flame. German gunners respond instantly, tracers clawing the sky. 2 Mosquitoes vanish in sprays of debris. Another hit in the wing slams into the water. But the survivors press on, strafing the escort vessels, then climbing hard for the exit. In minutes, it's over. Where once lay a convoy, now only burning hulls and black smoke. As the formation races back toward the sea, Mould looks down. Bloody hell, he whispers. You could heat half of Norway with that fire. From late 1944 to the war's end, Banff Strike Wing and Dalekey Strike Wing conducted near-daily assaults on Axis shipping off Norway's coast. Their goal cut off the German iron ore routes and choke supply lines to U-boat bases. It was a war fought at wave-top height, brutal, personal, and merciless. The Mosquito's combination of rockets and 20mm cannon made it ideal for attacking ships and coastal targets. Unlike the heavy bow fighters before them, Mosquitoes could dash and strike and vanish before flak could find its range. Each sortie lasted hours across frozen seas, often in gale winds or blinding snow squalls. Pilots flew by instinct, navigating through cloud gaps and fjord channels narrower than a football field. Losses were high. Wooden wings, though strong, could not always withstand the concussive blasts of near-miss flak. Many aircraft vanished without trace, yet morale never broke. In 1 week alone, Banff Wing sank or damaged 30 enemy vessels, crippling Germany's last coastal trade routes. The men behind the missions, they were a mixed band: Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, Britons, hardened by years of war. Their camaraderie ran deep, their humor dark. One Mosquito pilot painted plywood for Hitler on his nose. Another named his aircraft Mahogany Menace. They drank, fought, and mourned together, but once in the air, discipline reigned. They trusted their machines as much as each other. Navigators joked that they could feel the fjord walls in their bones. Pilots developed a sixth sense for the Mosquito's behavior, the subtle vibration before a stall. The groan of the fuselage when the wings flexed under pressure. For many Norwegians, those wooden silhouettes flashing through the valleys became a symbol of hope. Resistance groups would light signal fires to guide them, risking execution if caught. The longest daylight operation, Black Friday, February 9, 1945, one of the bloodiest days for the Mosquito Force. A Banff Wing formation attacked shipping near Ford Fjord but ran into a trap. German flak batteries and FW-190 fighters were waiting. Within 15 minutes, 9 Mosquitoes and 2 Mustang escorts were shot down, a single engagement that claimed more than 20 airmen. Yet even amid disaster, they destroyed 2 merchant ships and damaged several others. Wing Commander Aitken wrote in his log that night, they called it Black Friday. But I say we proved again that the Mosquito can fight like a cornered tiger. We hit them, we bled, and we'll go back tomorrow. And they did. Legacy of the Fjords. When the war ended 2 months later, the Banff Wing had flown over 500 sorties, sinking or crippling nearly 400,000 tons of enemy shipping. The Germans called them the Hornets of the North. For the air crews who survived, the memories of those fjord runs never faded: the smell of spruce and sea spray, the shock of cannon fire, the knowledge that a split-second error meant a wooden coffin at the bottom of a frozen bay. But their efforts starved the U-boat bases, hastened the collapse of the Kriegsmarine, and opened Norway to liberation. The Mosquito, the paper plane once dismissed as folly, had turned into the scourge of the North Sea. As the war neared its end, its wings carried not only rockets and bombs, but the pride of every carpenter and pilot who had dared to believe that wood could defy steel. April 25, 1945, Kiel, northern Germany. The war is all but over. Yet over the gray Baltic dawn, the sky still vibrates with the rumble of Merlin engines. 20 Mosquitoes from No. 608 Squadron are streaking toward the coast on what will be one of the last offensive missions flown by the Royal Air Force. Their orders are precise: strike the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen and enemy shipping in Kiel Harbor, simultaneously a final blow to the crumbling German war machine. In the lead cockpit, Wing Commander R.B. Watts checks his watch, 0745 hours. Formation steady, he calls over the intercom. Below, the sea is calm, reflecting pale sunlight through wisps of fog. Behind him, a second wave of Mosquitoes, each carrying 4 500-pounders, flies in perfect line. They are the end of a lineage that began with skepticism and laughter. Now, in these final weeks, even the Luftwaffe hardly dares to rise against them. As they approach Kiel, Watts's navigator spots the port through gaps in the haze. Flak towers, 2 o'clock, he warns. Bomb doors open, Watts replies. The air vibrates as the Mosquito shudders from the release. 4 bombs fall clean, their impact muffled by distance. Then an eruption of flame tears through the harbor. Direct hits, the rear crew reports. even as Watts banks hard for the coast tracers rise from the flak towers. A shell explodes beneath the port wing. The Mosquito lurches, panels ripping away. "Hydraulics gone," shouts the navigator. Watts grits his teeth, fighting the stick, as the aircraft dips toward the waves. With superhuman control, he manages to keep it level until they reach open sea. Only then does he allow himself a breath. "Hold on, we're taking her home." They limp back across the North Sea at 1,000 feet, the wooden fuselage soaked in oil and seawater. Hours later, when they land at RAF Downham Market, Watts climbs out of the shattered cockpit and looks at the torn plywood wing, the same fragile handmade structure that had survived 600 miles of flak and fire. He pats the fuselage softly. "You've done your part, girl," he murmurs. The Mosquito's last mission in Europe is over. Within 2 weeks, Germany will surrender. From fire to silence, the Mosquito's war had lasted barely 4 years, yet it spanned every front, every role. It flew over Berlin, Burma, Norway, the Mediterranean, and the jungles of the Far East. It photographed the beaches before D-Day and the ruins after VE Day. When peace finally came, many Mosquitoes were simply left to rot on airfields across Britain. For crews who had trusted their lives to the machine, it was a bitter sight. They stood in rows, remembered pilot John Stevens, like tired birds with broken wings. Yet others found new purpose. In the months after VE Day, Mosquito PR units became the eyes of the Allies during occupation, mapping bombed cities, tracing minefields, and photographing every bridge from Bremen to Vienna. Their lenses captured the aftermath of total war with haunting clarity. In Asia, Mosquito squadrons continued fighting until Japan's surrender. At Kangla, Burma, the humidity warped the wooden panels. Crews patched them daily with shellac and faith. They attacked Japanese supply lines across the Irrawaddy River and strafed troop columns retreating through the jungle. It was in these final missions, low, slow, and personal, that the Mosquito reminded the world why it mattered. Speed and strength, yes, but also adaptability, grace, and human craftsmanship. The end of an era. By 1946, jet technology had eclipsed the propeller age. The Mosquito, once untouchable, found itself overtaken by the very future it had foretold, sleek fighters like the Meteor and Vampire. Yet even those early jets lacked its range and reliability. For several more years, Mosquitoes continued in service as photo reconnaissance and weather aircraft. Some were sold abroad. Canada used them for mapping its vast northern wilderness. Sweden and Israel operated them as fast-strike aircraft. New Zealand and Australia flew them into the 1950s, their wooden skins fading, but their hearts strong. The RAF finally retired its last operational Mosquito in 1963, over 2 decades after its first combat flight. When historians later tried to categorize it, they struggled. Was it a bomber? A fighter? A reconnaissance plane? The truth was simpler and greater. It was whatever the moment required. The measure of a miracle. At its core, the Mosquito's story was never just about engineering. It was about imagination, about the carpenters in High Wycombe who cut plywood by hand for wings that would fly faster than bullets, about the women of Leavesden who glued panels in unheated sheds through the Blitz, about the test pilots who risked their lives for a machine the establishment had called impossible. British de Havilland once said aviation will always need dreamers, because dreams, not doctrine, make the impossible fly. In the Mosquito, that dream became real, a machine born from wood and willpower forged not in steel, but in belief. When veterans gathered after the war, they would speak of the aircraft with a kind of affection reserved for living things. One old pilot, his hair silver, summed it up best. She wasn't a plane. She was a promise that we could be cleverer than fear. A service ceiling above 37,000 feet. A top speed of 415 mph faster than the Spitfire MX-V, and a frame of birch spruce and balsa materials that grew in forests, not factories. It was proof that innovation thrives under pressure, that beauty can be built in wartime, and that courage can be measured in craftsmanship as much as in combat. The Mosquito wasn't just the fastest aircraft of its era. It was the most human because every inch of it bore the mark of hands, not machines. When it first flew, they called it a paper plane. When it ended the war, they called it the Wooden Wonder. and history has called it something even simpler, immortal.